Welcome to The Yin Project. I'm your host, Emily Bevan. Today we're talking with Julie Houghton, a career coach in San Francisco, and you can find her at juliehoughton.com. Let's get started. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Thanks so much for being
on.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
I'm super excited.
And I just wanted to share with everyone how we know each other, which is through GGMG, Golden Gate Mothers Group in San Francisco, which is such an awesome organization. And we led the Careers and Entrepreneurs Committee for, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I started to lose track of how many years it had been.
Yeah. And we put on some really awesome
events.
We did.
It was super fun.
For me, this is kind of a continuation of talking with women in business, women, entrepreneurs and people in careers. And it just kind of feels a little full circle to have you on here. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I want to talk a little bit about your journey. You were in the corporate world, and then you had this moment where tell me what that moment was, because now this is what you do, is helping people get out of that moment and find their next direction. What was it like for you? And then take me through like going to school and just like how you really launched a totally new career on your own. You are an entrepreneur. Like, walk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because there was a moment in a sense, but at the same time, it was sort of like 20 years in the making. So looking back, I never really knew what I wanted to do for my career.
What did you get your undergrad?
I majored in English.
Okay.
I think my dad had really good intentions, but in his mind, I would be really happy being a doctor. Mm-hmm. And so I got a lot of input around that idea of being a doctor. And I think I kind of got to the point where I didn't have a connection to my own kind of inner knowing of what would make me happy. I didn't think it was being a doctor. How old are you at
this time?
I mean, this was even like high school.
It's so hard to know.
It's so hard to know.
I mean, you and I both have children now, and we were just talking about our kids. Like, at what point do you start saying, "Hey, what do you want to do for the rest of your life?"
Yeah.
Like, how are we supposed to know in high school? I remember doing like a career day, and I either wanted to be an attorney, because my uncle is a state prosecutor,
mm-hmm.
or a chef. And so those were like the two things.
Totally.
I kind of was somewhere in between.
Yeah. I also feel like there's this idea that you know once and then that's it for life. Whereas I feel like now I really believe you might know multiple times because you might have more than one career. It might be like, I know that I want to do this thing, and maybe you do it for some period of time and then it's not working for you anymore. And then you have another moment of knowing, now this is the next thing I want to do. So,
and the older generation has a really hard time understanding that because they had pensions.
Yeah.
They didn't have the 401k. So like when you were in a job, you were there for like 30 years. And there was this real loyalty on both sides. And now, my husband is in the tech world. If you're at a job for too long, that's almost seen as a negative.
Totally.
You're not innovating. You're not advancing your career.
Mm-hmm.
So like you have to change, every 4 years. And I think that's a really good point, is like, and for me, who knows what the future will hold for any of this, in terms of AI and a lot of the innovation, what we would be doing in 10, 20, 30 years. Certainly we're all working longer, but to your point, you probably know what the statistic is. But I think the average person will have 7, 8,
many careers,
10 jobs, many different careers.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going into college and you're like, kind of don't know. So then you just do kind of a general, which is what I did. I got my undergrad in communications because I didn't really know. Is that kind of where?
No, I stuck with this pre-med idea for quite a while.
Oh,
I was going to be pre-med. I was not enjoying any of the classes. And then finally it occurred to me, like,
did you have to do a cadaver?
No, I think I might have found that a little bit fascinating, to be honest, like that part.
So I took biology. This was when I was in San Diego at Mesa Community College. where the credits were $11 a credit or a class. Wow. It was like 3 credits. I don't know. It was like $50 to take this class, biology class, and we actually had cadavers. It was
How was it?
Fascinating. It was
yeah,
really
it sounds fascinating to me. That would have been better. No, I stuck with this pre-med idea for a while. And then I decided I was going to be an English major who was pre-med and that this would differentiate me from the other pre-med people. And then finally I was like, I let go of the pre-med idea. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I briefly worked in publishing after college. I worked for a literary agency for about a year. And then I worked at National Geographic magazine for about a year. I think my logic was I love to read, so maybe the publishing world will make me happy. And that kind of literal translation, that wasn't true. You know, in retrospect, I could see like what I loved about being an English major is that it's actually very analytical. You're analyzing the characters, you're analyzing the book. It wasn't just about literally and loving books. So then I ended up working in the business world.
But you have to have that experience and that maturity to have that type of realization.
Yeah, you might need to. But I also feel like if I could be a career coach to my college age self, I would have asked these questions to understand what was underneath the love of being an English major. Like, I feel like it could have been a short conversation between current me and college me that actually could have uncovered this pretty quickly in like, you know, a 30-minute talk.
Right.
But I didn't.
But that wasn't part of the
No,
you had to live it through this mud of,
now I can ask other people those questions to help them uncover it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a short stint in publishing and it wasn't for me. So I ended up working in the business world. I think I was already kind of starting to give up a little bit already. I felt like in publishing, I was like really underpaid. I felt sort of under.
What do you mean give up? What is that? What is it?
Give up on liking what I was doing. Give up on feeling fulfilled by it. I felt like publishing wasn't it. It seemed so logical to me that if I loved being an English major, I would love publishing, and that didn't work. And at the same time, I felt undervalued. Like I could barely pay my rent on the, you know, salary I was making in publishing, and I was being asked to do administrative stuff and not really use my brain much. And I mean, I could see a path to a future job where I would use my brain, but still there was something missing. So I think to some extent I started to already give up by going into this consulting job in the business world that I was, it's not that I was passionate about business. It's that I felt like, well, there's demand for this. I will get the chance to use my brain. This will make my parents happy. It's not medicine, but it's this very kind of generally agreed upon idea that pursuing a career in business is a respectable career path.
Yeah.
So I did that.
I work in business. I'm a business girl.
So I did that for about 4 or 5 years. Everybody there went to business school. So I just kind of followed that path as well. So I went to Berkeley for business school. Part of what's tricky is that it's not that it was misery. I actually really enjoyed business school. There were even things about that job, although in many ways I hated it. There were still things about that job that were good. There were things, you know, that were interesting, ways in which I was using my brain. I worked with some really cool people, had some really awesome managers. So in some ways that makes it trickier sometimes to leave a career that's not the right fit if it's not total misery. You can kind of talk yourself into the ways in which you should be grateful to have this career and nobody's in a job that's perfect and all this kind of stuff. Right. Makes it kind of more complicated. Right. So I went to business school, and then after business school, I kind of job hopped, like changing jobs every year and a half, 2 years. I was working in marketing and product management strategy. So kind of job hopping, hoping that the next job would be better. I think on paper, everything looked great. Like I had gone to a good business school. I was working at companies in these jobs that were kind of like coveted positions. Like everything looked great on paper. But I wasn't happy. I found, you know, you and I have talked about this too. Like I found myself kind of at the end of the day, like having a glass of wine every night to sort of just like quote unquote de-stress from having spent the day doing something that wasn't me. The huge turning point for me was having kids. At that point, I was working in financial services and I had really given up. Like, I'd gone to this company thinking this place is supposed to have good work-life balance. I have zero interest in financial services, but I have an MBA, so I really should know more about this stuff. So this seems like, you know, a good step for me. It sounds super boring, but I have given up. So I'm going to just look at things like,
it's not out there. The perfect job is just not out there for you.
Yeah, it was like, I'm just a lost cause. You know, some people know what they want to do, and I guess it's just not meant for me to ever know. I'm just sort of a lost cause. So I'll at least go someplace that's like a good company, good work-life balance. I should probably know more about financial services if I have an MBA. So I'll just go here. Okay. That's where I was working when my daughter was born. And when she was born, I felt like I just had this like deep knowing that I couldn't keep. There were a couple things. First, this job ended up, I was like pretty long hours, pretty stressful. It was kind of at the beck and call of senior leadership because it was an internal strategy role. So if they had a question, you kind of had to drop everything and, you know, create a PowerPoint deck around it. So the hours could be long and unpredictable. And so there was the literal piece of like, I don't want to sacrifice all this time away from my kid for this job that's like high stress, long hours that doesn't hold any meaning for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, there was that piece. But I think like an even more powerful piece of it was I don't want to set this model for my daughter. I don't want her to grow up seeing me work in this job that makes me unhappy, because I think of it as the safe path and I'm too scared to, you know, make a change. And I want her to see that it's possible to be fulfilled and happy doing what you're left. I want to model that for her. So that was like the turning point. It was still a process. You know, I couldn't afford to just quit that job. But I think the huge turning point for me was that I had spent years thinking about the fact that I was unhappy in my career, but not doing anything about it. So I think the huge turning point was I stopped just thinking about it and I started to actually take action. I was no longer like just in my head about it.
Okay, so I have to know, like, because I can just imagine there's people listening to this and they're in that paralysis. What was that first step for you? That action?
Interestingly for me, the first step was to get a career coach. I had thought about working with a coach for years, but I had told myself like, this is a luxury I can't afford. I should be able to figure this out myself. Yeah. I worked with a career coach. It was not actually the most amazing fit, to be honest. It's not that I left that coaching relationship feeling like this is life-changing and now I know what I want to do. I didn't actually, but it was at least an action. It was at least a step that I took. Mm-hmm. I think I also, I started to, you know, talk to people who were doing things I might want to do. I started to like take this idea seriously, like almost take myself seriously, the idea of doing something else. So instead of just thinking about the fact that I was unhappy and then telling myself all the reasons I should stay in my job anyway, you know, nobody's that happy with their job and you should be grateful to have one. And if you quit this job, you're going to mess up your resume and you can never go back. Like all these ways in which I'd been in my head about this for years and never really even considering that it was a real possibility to make a change. I think I started to take myself seriously and do things like actually talk to people who were doing things I might want to do. And
that is a huge piece of advice, I think, for anyone listening. When I switched from, I worked in marketing and public relations for about 8 years before I got into real estate. And I was at that point as well. And I had someone put real estate into my ear, mm-hmm. and it made me go, okay, let's follow that. Not like, okay, I'll do this.
Yeah.
Now. I talked to as many people as I
mm-hmm.
could. I talked to, and I heard it all. I heard the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And that was very, very, very important to talk to people that were actually, walking the walk.
Yeah. I always tell people too, I think there are a number of ways in which getting out of your head is helpful. Like I was kind of stuck in my head in the sense that I would think about it without taking any action. I think another way,
like stew,
and just be sitting on my couch having a glass of wine, thinking about what could I do instead without ever giving any of it any serious research, and then talking myself out of it and convincing myself.
To be fair, things feel, I don't want to say easier now, but they do. They feel easier. When I was in college, Facebook didn't really exist.
Yeah, there are many more ways to connect with people.
Podcasts didn't exist. Like the information has just grown, and the resources and the availability. I mean, it's really within the last 10 years, really since the iPhone came out, which I didn't have one until many years, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. And I think it came out, and I'm going to screw up the dates. Anyways, it's all changed.
Yeah.
And it does feel easy. It's not easier, but there's more access.
Totally. But it's still just as easy to stay in your head about it, because it can feel scary to take that step, to take yourself seriously and actually start to, move from thinking about something to taking action. The other thing I think is I tell people another way in which we can get that it's helpful to get out of our head is when you're doing something like talking to someone, like you were saying, you were talking to people who were doing real estate, and it's not that you instantly knew this is the path for me. I tell people when you're having those conversations, even when you're just looking for people to talk to, kind of going through any step of this process, finding people to talk to, having the conversation, reading websites, checking out the website of a real estate agent, whatever it may be, through that whole process, to not just be in your head thinking about what you're learning, but it sounds woo-woo, but to check in with your body and check in with your feelings, to see, as you're getting ready to have the conversation, or as you're in the conversation, is your body relaxed and open, or are your shoulders tight? Is your stomach in a knot? And this kind of touches on something else that you and I were talking about ahead of this podcast, was if something feels scary, what's the nature of that fear? Is it that this thing feels scary and it's mixed with a sense of dread? That's a sign something's off. But if you're talking to people and exploring a career idea and it feels scary, but there's a little bit of excitement or curiosity mixed in, that's a sign that there's something there that's close to your heart. It might not end up being the career path for you, but it's a sign that there's something there to explore. It's you're headed in a good direction. And if you keep taking steps in that direction, you're going to be learning something important. It's kind of like a signpost. So I think that idea of getting out of your head is important in this sense too, not just of the importance of taking action and how action will lead to clarity, but also getting out of your head in the sense that what wisdom does your body hold? What wisdom does your feeling that's coming up for you hold? And what can you learn from that? Okay.
So take me through, you're at this point.
So
you're making some baby steps.
Yeah.
That catalyst to make the switch.
I realized it was interesting. This is another thing that I find sometimes happens with clients. It sounds kind of funny to say it, I kind of had disdain for career coaches. I had this kind of story of a
lot of people hate real estate. So I understand that.
I felt okay, they could never figure it out for themselves, so they're just going to help other people figure it out instead.
I have heard that.
So
those that can't teach.
Yeah.
It's a really shitty saying, but I've heard it.
And I think in my case, it was sort of a defense mechanism. I think deep down, there was something compelling to me about the idea of being a career coach, and as sort of a protective mechanism, this idea of that feels scary. It felt scary because it was close to my heart. But I think there's a way in which when something feels scary, we just want to get away from that uncomfortable feeling. It's not a common thing to stop and like investigate your fear and be like, is it mixed with dread? That's a stop sign. Is it mixed with curiosity and excitement? That means I should keep going. Like, that's not how I approached fear in the past. In the past, if something felt scary, that felt uncomfortable, and I would want to avoid that uncomfortable feeling. So in retrospect, I think that disdain was actually the fact that that's really the only career I had disdain for. There might be some careers where I would be like, that's not for me, but I didn't have that kind of judgy.
I mean, telemarketers.
I feel like there are some people who are like, maybe they're like passionate about it, like I would be like, yeah, not for me. But
I mean, they must get such a high when
they get somebody to say yes.
Yes, I do have 5 minutes.
Exactly. I feel like there are some people who can do that and maybe bring a sense of integrity to it. Not everybody. But also, I don't have any strong feelings about it. That's the difference. I might be like, yeah, I don't want to be a telemarketer. And there are some like,
but you had like a real
ones.
Like
I had
you had a real. There was like a like there was an
energy there. Yeah.
Okay.
So, in retrospect, that's a clue, I think. And I see that sometimes with clients where they'll be like, I would never do that career. And there's like an energy behind that never. And I feel like oftentimes that's a sign that there's something to explore there. Like they might be telling themselves some kind of story about what it means if they do that thing. So yeah, in retrospect, that was kind of one clue. So yeah, I worked with the coach. I realized kind of through the course of that and through the course of talking to somebody who I knew who was a coach, she was working as a health coach, that I was interested in being a coach. So I started this was a kind of a crazy time in my life because I had 2 babies at this point, like they're a year apart. So it was like 2 babies working full time, and decided to start taking classes to become a coach.
Don't you think that's really common for women?
Yeah.
I started real estate when my son was 6 months
Yeah.
old. Is that common with your clients now?
I think it is.
Have started young families and they're like, this isn't working. I got to find something.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of times it's like you've got these young kids and the corporate world or whatever this kind of job is that doesn't allow you enough flexibility is not working for you. But maybe you're in the situation where financially you can't afford to just leave it. So you kind of have to just start building something else at the same time to build yourself a career that gives you the space and flexibility and meaning that you need. So yeah, I don't think it's all that uncommon. So it was a process. I spent like a year going back to school to be a coach. Even that was a process because initially I thought I wanted to be a health coach because I'm really passionate.
What's a health coach?
It's like a growing field where it's like somebody who's helping somebody with whatever type of health goal. It might be people who just feel like I've got something going on. I feel sluggish, and what if do I need to clean up my diet? And maybe people are leading like some sort of a detox or cleanse or whatever, or working one-on-one with people to identify like food sensitivities, or there's definitely
look into that. I feel like I need to.
There's a lot around people who feel like maybe they've struggled a little bit with like restriction around eating, and they want to eat more intuitively, get away from diet culture. Sometimes health coaches are working with people who are actually sick. Sometimes people will have kind of like joint backgrounds, like they're a licensed nutritionist and a health coach. That's what I thought I wanted to do initially, but I got to the end of that program and I enjoyed it again. Like I said, with business school, I got to the end of the program and I was trying to figure out who I wanted to work with. And the program I did was pretty holistic. So it wasn't just about food.
Where was this program?
It was called the, I'm going to blank on the name, Institute for Integrative Health, IIN.
Oh, okay.
It was a pretty holistic program. So it was like not just about food, but about like your whole, kind of being, like the stress level in your life, having a sense of purpose, all this sort of thing. I got to the end of that program and I was like, I don't want to help people lose weight or work with intuitive eating, any of that stuff. I don't want to work with sick people. It was like, what I really want to help people with is their life purpose. So on the one hand, I was excited about this clarity. On the other hand, part of me was a little bit like, oh shit, like I just did a health coach program and it's sounding like what I really want to do is be a career coach. And so
I know, but you have to know what you don't want to do or what you don't like.
Sometimes it's
in order to know what you do.
Right.
Like. It's like a reverse engineer.
Totally. It's not always a completely linear path.
No, it's not. Well, life's not a linear path.
And I think I came out of that with the knowledge that I did really like coaching, so I was on the right path in some ways. Right. So typically people don't actually train specifically to be a career coach. Usually people who are working as a career coach have like a life coach background. The program that I had done was pretty focused on health. So I felt like I wanted more just like coaching skills. So I did another training program after that was another year-long training program. So in the meanwhile,
a lot of education.
I do. In the meantime, I'm like working in the corporate world still this whole time. And then, I eventually started to kind of transition where I started working part-time at my corporate job, and started to build this coaching business, and then ultimately quit the corporate job. That was interesting as well, because I had told myself, which I think a lot of women tell themselves, there's no option for me to work part-time. It's not available. I had told myself this. Nobody at this company worked part-time. I got to the point where I was willing to leave. So maybe that was part of, that might have been helpful in some ways. I was willing to leave and find something else part-time that I could use just to make money to, kind of bring in some stable income while I built this coaching business. So I was willing to walk away when I told them I'm not going to be able to do full-time anymore. And they let me do part-time.
Guess what? A part-time came
exactly.
Up.
So I had pretty much
Do you feel like
myself,
in general Sorry to interrupt you. Do you feel like part-time work is becoming more available since there's so many more women that are working now?
There
are employers becoming more flexible?
I think it's getting better. It's still not great. There is that reality. I think it's another reason why a lot of women end up creating their own thing, is to have that flexibility, including the ability to work part-time. So it could definitely be a lot better. But it has improved, I think, in the last 10 years. There are places like there's a really great organization called Opera Group, which it's I know
Opera,
APRES. Yeah.
Like after.
Interestingly, the CEO of that was a previous co-chair of the DGMG Career and Entrepreneurship Committee as well. That's how I met her.
Of course she was. Of course she was.
I met her there.
A lot of great people going through that organization.
So she started this organization supporting women who are returning to work after some kind of a break. So she does have, partnerships with companies who are offering things like a returnship. If you've had a break, it's kind of like an internship, but for someone who has professional experience.
That's fantastic, because for a long time, women felt like they weren't marketable. They didn't have any skills.
Yeah. And it's such a huge untapped resource. There's another organization. I don't think it's as active in San Francisco anymore, but there's an organization called Mom Corps, which it was the same idea. It was like employers, it was like job postings that were flexible, part-time, remote, focused, with the targeting moms. So it's getting better. But it's still, to be honest, it's still not great. But I do think there is that idea that we can have a tendency to tell ourselves something's not possible and kind of write it off as an option without having ever even explored it.
All the time, we do it every day.
I definitely had a period of time of having made no effort to find out if I could work part-time at my job, where I just told myself this is impossible.
Right.
And then when it got to the point where I was truly willing to leave, then as soon as I brought it up, it turned out that part-time was an option after all.
I think that's also like a mindset, and that is like can just be perceived by people. I'm listening to Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights right now. It is so good. He is so
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Oh my gosh. He performs it. He is a writer. He is a poet. He's pretty fantastic. One of the things that he talks about is when he got to Hollywood, one of his producer friends said, act like you walk into a space, you walk in, you meet producers, you go into the big offices. You're there because you want it, not because you need it. And so he actually kicked him out. He's like, you need to go to Europe for a while. Like, you're too, because when he got there, he had already done Dazed and Confused. He had done Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 or 3 or whatever. So he had some experience, and he was like, all right, I'm ready to work. I got to go. I got to, start moving and grooving and shaking. And they were like, no, you're too, you want it too bad. And they can sense that. And when you present, and this is the same in my business too, when you present like, I'm here, I want to help you. I want your business. Sure. I don't need your business. That's a very different like mindset. And it's an energy that people pick up on. When I meet with buyers or I'm presenting for sellers, for someone that wants to sell their house, if you walk in with that, like that needy energy, like, I haven't sold a house in a while. I need I need another paycheck. Let's get this on the market tomorrow. Like, they can feel that energy.
Totally.
Versus like, take it or leave it. And that's, I feel like the energy that you brought to your job is like, look, I want to be here, but I got something else lined up. I don't need to be here. There's just that, like, if you don't have it, I feel like you just got to kind of fake that energy, because people pick up on that.
Totally. And I think the ideal is to believe it yourself so that you don't have to fake it. Like, to also
talk yourself into
believe it yourself.
That's a good point.
Because there is sort of a scarcity mindset to it, this idea that like, this is my only option. There's this scarcity mindset. So part of the challenge is like convincing yourself that, you don't need it per se, that you have other options.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you for talking about your journey. You're loving your job now. I know that you can feel the change that you're making in people's lives and having huge impacts. And we don't have a ton of time today because, look, we're both busy moms. And I want to make sure that we cover a couple topics. Excuse me. You have such an awesome website. I know that you're a really good writer. And I was looking at your website and your blog posts and, thinking about our show together. And there were so many entries where I'm like, oh my gosh, each one of these entries could be like a standalone episode. They're just so rich and content. So I want to make sure that we talk about them. And I feel really drawn to the article, the blog post that you wrote about 3 mindset shifts to help you realize your dreams. And it kind of dovetails on what we were just talking about, is that mindset. Do you think we could talk about that for a minute?
Definitely.
Okay.
You're gonna have to remind me what I said the 3 mind shifts were.
What you said. Okay, I'll pull it up. What you said the 3 mind shifts were.
Remind me.
I'll remind you, and then you can just you can take off from there. And you have Addicted to Busy, which I love that. We talked about that. I just finished reading the Do Less book by Kate Northrup, which was fantastic. So you talk about the 3 mindset shifts to help you realize your dreams. And number 1 is getting out of your head and start taking action. And we talked about that a little bit. So if there was anything else that you wanted to elaborate on that, now's the time.
Yeah, I think there's not much more that I would add, but I do think there's a way in which it can become sort of almost like this sort of culturally agreed upon idea that it's not so unusual, or there's sort of nothing wrong almost with being unhappy in your job, like that so many people are unhappy and this is just how it is. And you kind of get together with your friends and talk about, the bad things in your job. And then you both just keep going back to those jobs. And that can seem very normal. And it can also be something that you sort of tell yourself of like, I should be grateful to even have this job. I'm asking for too much. Nobody's that happy. You know, you look around and see friends who aren't that happy. I think there's a way in which that is part of how we can stay stuck in our heads of like, maybe you sort of fantasize sometimes about having another job, but you're, like I was saying earlier, you're kind of not actually even taking yourself seriously because it's just something that you think about. Or maybe you are taking yourself seriously to some extent and you really are miserable enough that you want to make a change, but you're too scared to take any action towards it because you've got stories that you're telling yourself about what will happen if you do. Like I used to tell myself, if I leave...
Do you have any advice on like breaking that pattern?
I think it's just it's just the recognition that you are not going to find a new career by thinking about it. It's just never going to happen. You're going to have to take action. Some of it is just this sort of light bulb moment of nothing is going to be accomplished by me just thinking about it. You're going to have to take action. Also, I think lifting the pressure that if you take action and you explore something that turns out to not be the right fit, that is not wasted time at all. Yeah. You are going to learn something either way. Like
do you think people could wind up feeling defeated and like, see, I told you it did, you know, telling themselves, I told you it wasn't going to work out. That's stupid.
Yeah. And discouraged. Like there are no, kind of like I did, like I'm a lost cause. There are no, you know, this idea of finding meaningful work is just not, you know, going to be true for me in this life. So I tell people when I'm working with them, like, you know, when we're doing this process of exploring career options, like let's make an exhaustive list of anything that's ever crossed your mind, as well as the stuff that we come up with in the sessions together as things to explore. But if anything has ever crossed your mind, let's put it on the list, even if you already have doubts about it, because we don't want it to pop up into your head 10 years from now as a what if I had done that thing. We want to go through with intention and explore this idea. And if you come up with a definitive, no, this is not the thing for me, you're going to have specific reasons, informed reasons why it's not the thing for you that are meaningful as you then...
You'll have real data.
Yeah, then you'll take
stories.
that information and apply it to the next thing you explore. So I think sometimes it can feel like there's a fear of being discouraged. Like if I explore this thing and it's not the right fit, then I'm just discouraged and kind of back at the drawing board. So some of it is also a mindset shift of like any action you take is going to lead to more information, which is going to lead to more clarity, even if some of that is learning what's not right for you. And then the important thing is not just learning what's not right for you, but understanding why. Because then that will automatically...
I think that's really crucial.
That why will automatically give you important information about what could be the right fit for you and things to sort of pressure test as you explore future options.
So the other two ones that you said was you start to see fear as a good thing.
Yeah.
And then the third is focusing on the what instead of worrying about the how.
Yeah, the fear one I alluded to a little bit earlier as well, that I think our tendency when something feels scary is to want to get away from that. And I know for myself, I was waiting for the fear to go away. I was waiting for this like magical moment when I would not feel scared and then I would make my move.
Did you feel fear in the beginning? Like, did you have that self-doubt of like, okay, I've launched my website. No one is going to hire me. I'm not going to have any clients. I'm not going to make any money.
Yes.
I'm going to have to go back to the 9 to 5. Like I'm creating stories in my head of what
on
I
my
think
behalf.
may have been running on your behalf. So I can only imagine like what your actual stories were.
Huge epiphany
and
for me.
How did you like get over that hump?
I think it was like, you know how a lot of times with an epiphany, like once you have the epiphany, it just seems so obvious.
Yes. Every morning I play Word.
Exactly.
And when the word comes,
you're like, it was so obvious.
It's like a drug with that epiphany moment where you're like, oh, yes. Yes.
So this huge epiphany for me was the fear is never going away. That having fear is just part of what it means
like
to be
it's just going to be something else.
Yeah, you can't.
Like tomorrow it'll be cancer or gun shootings.
You can't wait for this magical moment when the fear is going to go away. But the fear has something to teach you. It's a signpost, like I said. If the fear is mixed with dread and your shoulders are tight and your stomach's in knots, that there's something off. Like something about that is not in alignment with who you are. Like that's the sort of feeling I would get when I would think about some other corporate job. Like I would feel scared and I would feel all sorts of bad, feelings like dread, because that wasn't the path for me. If the fear is mixed with some kind of curiosity or excitement, it's a sign that there's something there. It's scary to you because it matters to you, not because it's not the right fit. So
I wish they would teach this in college for people.
And I feel like that shift made me actually welcome fear, which sounds a little cheesy, but if you can see how much wisdom it holds for you, you can, instead of having your reaction be like, I want to wait till this fear ends, or I want to avoid something that feels scary, you can welcome it because it's such a source of wisdom, of like your internal wisdom. And so then you can be almost like a detective, like, what does this fear have to tell me? And then also you're no longer stuck the way that I was for so many years of this kind of like, I'm going to wait for this fear to pass. Like you just can be sort of like, this is to be expected. I'm expecting to feel scared. What does it have to tell me? So it's not something that's keeping you stuck anymore.
Yeah. I'm having like a lot of feelings right now about like childbirth.
Yes. So much. I mean, there's like, I was just talking to a family member who's going to have a kid soon, about to give birth. And and she's scared. And there's so much external noise around that, in which you're taught to be scared. Yeah.
I mean, it is truly the ultimate surrender, which is really difficult for a control freak like me. And it's not something that you can. I've had, friends and colleagues give birth, obviously, and it's not something that you can share. Yes, but also like you can't tell someone like they have to have the experience on their own.
And you can't
give
predict
them any advice or any.
It's the same thing where you can't come up anytime you're sort of telling yourself stories about how something might go, that can be very tied to fear of like these stories you tell yourself about the scary things that might happen. And childbirth is kind of the ultimate example of like, you have no idea. You cannot predict how it's going to go, no matter what classes you went to or any of that. You can't predict it. So any stories you come up with are, sort of pointless in a way because they're just stories.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So the last one you said is you started focusing on the what instead of worrying about the how. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think that for me, this is another way in which I stayed stuck. I would have an idea pop into my head of like, I wonder if I might enjoy doing that type of work. And then I instantly would have another voice that would tell me all the reasons why that wouldn't work. So kind of that inner critic voice.
That damn voice. I have it too.
So, for me, a lot of the recurring themes were if you take a step out of the corporate world, you're going to mess up your resume. People are going to want to know why you have this career gap. You're going to set yourself behind in terms of career progression. You're going to not have, you're going to have to come up with some good story to tell future employers about why you took this switch, and inevitably it won't work out. And you're going to end up right back here in the corporate world needing a job. And how are you going to explain this to employers? So you're going to mess up your resume. It's going to be irreversible. So that would be one of my recurring themes. And so that's sort of related to the how. Like, how are you going to make this work? Because any step you take off the corporate path is going to ruin your prospects for the corporate world in the future. And if this thing you want to do doesn't work out, you're going to be right back here in the corporate world, unable to get a job because you messed up your resume.
How dare you dream?
Exactly. That was a recurring theme. The other one was anything you want to do, you're never going to make any money at it. Like all this, like you're kind of, maybe you're not a complete lost cause. Maybe there are some things you would enjoy doing, but they're all going to be in the category of things you can't afford to do because you won't be able to support yourself. So that was another how, where I would just be like, it was interesting because it was not in the spirit of a how around like curiosity, like, I wonder how I could grow this business, or I wonder how I could connect with potential clients. There was not any sense of curiosity. It was definitely driven by that inner critic voice that was all the reasons why this wouldn't work. So the how was very negative. It was very...
So what was the what?
I feel like it's normal to have these questions about the how. Like, how am I going to switch? You know, let's say somebody wants to make
how am I going to pay my
total
rent?
Career switch. How am I going to make that switch and start over at a lower, you know, pay scale? How am I going to make that work? Or how am I going to do that thing that requires me to go back to school? You know, or how am I going to balance it with, you know, having kids? And I think it's not that those questions aren't important and valid ones. It's that, like, they have a time and a place. I think when there are things you're trying to tackle right from the start, they can, when they're too premature, they can keep you from fully exploring an opportunity. So you don't even know, you haven't explored the what. You know, like, you haven't explored that idea that you have of the thing you want to do. Like, let's say somebody's working in the corporate world and they're like, I've always deep down wanted to be an acupuncturist, but how am I going to go back to school for 4 years? How am I going to, you know, meet my, you know, financial needs in that 4 years? How am I going to manage starting over, you know, career wise? How am I going to build the business? So
instead of like thinking and fantasizing and feeling the joy of the what, which in this example is the acupuncturist.
Yeah. And more than just experiencing the joy of it, like, actually just exploring it as an idea to know, is this something you want to do or not? Yeah. Making an informed decision. Is being an acupuncturist the right fit for me? Because when those inner critic voices...
What does that look like? Like, what's the day in the life of that look like, instead of like focusing on that part of it, the actual job function?
I think, this job, you know, we didn't have time to talk about it today, but this idea of your strengths, like the things that you're good at that energize you, I think that is a key component of knowing if something's a good fit for you. Like,
I love that you said that, because we've talked about this before, but I was a terrible manager. I hated managing. Mm-hmm. So guess what? I was terrible at it. And I had so much, you know, feedback at my reviews on, like, well, you got to be a better manager. Like, that's the path in client services and in a large firm of climbing up the ladder. And I hated doing it. But I was great at managing my clients. I loved that part of my job. And I got to a point where I was like, look, I am really good at this and I am really bad. And I really dislike this part. It makes me feel yucky. Yeah. Why do I have to keep doing this yucky thing where I can just focus on something that I really enjoy and I'm really good at? And I don't know where the focus and the shift. To me, everyone should just do what they're really awesome at. And if they're in an organization and they're in a business and they need support, they need to find other people that are good at those things that they don't like doing and they're not good at doing. Yeah. That's my advice to everyone. Is
I think really a key thing is
what your strength
is. Not just if you're good at it. I think of it as a strength of, like, you tend to be good at it, but the real distinction is also that it's energizing. Because there can be things you've learned to be good at that still aren't energizing. You know, like my example was I got to be really good at making PowerPoint decks in the corporate world, but it was not energizing. I was good at it. But I think you tend to be good at it. And it's the really important thing is it energizing? So I think with this idea of the how versus the what, that when you have an idea, like, let's say that example of, like, what if I became an acupuncturist? If you have the inner critic voice shutting you down with all the reasons why it won't work and, like, diving into the how would I pull this off?
Right.
You haven't given yourself a chance to explore the what and know, is this a viable option? So I think it's important to go through it kind of systematically. And a huge piece of that is like having an inventory of your strengths. What are the things that you tend to be good at it that are energizing? And then you can look at it really objectively. Like, what is daily life as an acupuncturist? And would I get the chance to use my strengths?
How about talking to an acupuncturist?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking at,
I hear what you're saying. Like, you
looking at the daily life.
A chance.
Right. So then I feel like when you figure out the what, like, let's say you go through that process and you figure out, like, I feel really energized by the idea of being an acupuncturist. I can see these concrete ways in which I would get to use my strengths. And then there are important questions around the how, but the answers to those
come later.
Come through.
They come after.
Yes, so
right?
much
it's like they
easier when it's in pursuit of something that you're excited about and energized by and that you really want to do. Then you can feel like you've got the what, kind of like solidified. And then you can ask yourself these questions of like, okay, what choices do I need to make if I'm going to go back to school? Like, it flows. It's.
Do you think it's important to hold on as you're going through this process, to hold on to these ideas? I'm talking kind of directly to anyone that's looking to make a change in their career, meaning like you're not telling your mom or your family.
Like kind of keep it to yourself.
Just kind of keep it not secret, but just kind of protected, because I sometimes it seems like whenever I share an idea, there's always someone that just shoots it down and has, oh, well, that's not going to work because of this. Oh, they already came up with that. Oh, you're never going to make any money at that. Oh, 75% of real estate agents fail within their first 2 years. Like, so don't even bother trying type thing. Mm-hmm. Do you think it is valuable, or to counter that, like, do you want to share it with like your most trusted, your fan base, the people that support you kind of no matter what? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there are ways in which sharing it with people can be really helpful, but I think you definitely have to be intentional about it. In some ways it can be good to surround yourself with a community of people who are doing that thing. Like, let's say you want to switch to real estate and, to kind of have connections with people who are doing that thing and are happy, or connections with people who are doing something else and happy and who support you no matter what. Like, they might have ideas about what would make you happy, but they're not steering you in one direction or another. They're going to support you unconditionally. Right. And then I think for that group of people who can have a tendency, or where you suspect if you were to tell them, like, they might, point out all the reasons why they think this is going to fail. I think, there's nothing productive when you're in this sort of early kind of figuring this out stage, or just, starting something. There's nothing productive about facing that kind of feedback. I think when you do face it, it can be helpful. There's a book I love called Playing Big by Tara Moore. She talks about this idea of when somebody gives you feedback, it really is telling you what matters to that person. It's not actually telling you so much about yourself in most cases, but it tells you what that person values. So, and then you can decide, do I need this person? Do I need to do something that's in alignment with what this person values? Like, if that person's your boss, then if you want to keep that job, you probably do. But otherwise, you probably don't. It just tells you, like, this happened to me when I left the corporate world. Some people were so excited for me, and then other people were totally freaked out. And I think the people who were freaked out, it was, sometimes because they were also unhappy doing what they were doing. And the idea of somebody making a change was triggering for them. Or in some cases, they were just, risk averse, and combined with being pretty happy doing what they were doing. So the idea of, starting a business just wasn't their thing. And so they just told me what mattered to them. But I do think it can be really valuable to surround yourself with people who are, doing that thing that you want to do and are happy, or, like I said, doing something else totally different, but they support you no matter what. They're not, trying to steer you one way or another.
So we're out of time. We could literally talk for many more hours. I feel like we've
just touched the surface.
The surface.
It's been so fun talking to you.
Yeah, it was so fun talking to you. Your journey is really interesting, and I think it mirrors so many other people's journey. And I would love to, have you back and we could talk about other things. Some other topics that are kind of fresh to me is what's kind of going on post-pandemic. Like, what are the challenges people are enduring in this workforce? We've certainly had a lot of layoffs in the Bay Area. I'd love to talk about that. I'd also love to talk about mentorship. That's something that is really important to people now, and we kind of touched upon it a little bit. So I want to have you come back.
I would love that
when we have more time.
That would be so fun.
And I will link to your website, which is juliehoughton.com. She is clearly a super fantastic coach. And we will also do some links to some of the books that you recommended as well. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining me today. For more info, you can always find us at yin-project.com. Make it a great day.